Protesters across the country have been showing up to Tesla dealerships and showrooms, unhappy with Elon Musk and the government.
From plummeting Tesla sales to a surprising dip in Starlink subscriptions, the numbers aren't lying. And neither are the growing crowds of protesters calling him out. What started as scattered criticism has now become a coordinated backlash across multiple countries.
Today's protests were largely peaceful, but they follow a wave of vandalism and violence.
So what triggered this sudden shift? And why now? In this video, we break down the real reasons behind the sales collapse, the rise of anti-Elon protests, and what it all means for Musk's grip on the industries he once dominated.
The people pushing the propaganda that caused that guy to do it.
Why everyone turned on Musk? This was never part of the plan. Elon Musk, master of disruption, billionaire innovator, cultural lightning rod, wasn't supposed to lose control. People like him do not get ambushed. They dominate, they pivot, they absorb the chaos and turn it into profit. But this time, something shifted. Not because of a botched launch, a production delay, or even a courtroom defeat. No, Musk found himself blindsided by something far more abrupt, more humiliating, and far more damaging to the core of his empire. A full-force economic ambush launched by one of the countries he least expected. The moment Canada announced a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles, the impact was immediate and unforgiving. Overnight, Tesla's presence in the Canadian market evaporated. Prices doubled instantly. Demand collapsed. What had once been one of Tesla's most promising and steadily growing markets vanished in a matter of hours. Dealerships were frozen. Inventory sat untouched. Sales figures plunged. It was a clean sweep, an erasure. But that was only the opening shot. What followed made it clear this wasn't just economic policy. It was political retaliation wrapped in fiscal warfare. Within days, Canada axed a $66 million contract with Starlink, Musk's satellite internet project. No press conferences, no diplomatic back and forth, just a swift, cold cancellation that sent a message: this wasn't about business anymore. It was about Elon. The significance wasn't in the numbers, although they were brutal. The real story was the speed of the collapse and the way it triggered a ripple effect across industries and markets. It wasn't just Tesla's margins that took a hit. It was Musk's entire reputation as a reliable business partner. Investors didn't wait to see if things might stabilize. They didn't hedge. They exited. And they did it fast. What shook analysts most wasn't the chaos in Canada. It was the response from within. Musk's empire didn't circle the wagons. It fractured. Wall Street firms, typically slow to react and risk-averse by nature, wasted no time repositioning themselves. BlackRock, one of the largest asset managers in the world, started quietly reducing its exposure to Tesla. Vanguard, long known for standing by Musk through turbulence, followed soon after. And then came the move that sent chills through the financial sector. Kimball Musk, Elon's own brother and Tesla board member, sold millions in Tesla stock.
Tesla stock has rocketed up nearly 500%, but that's not based on the cars he's selling today.
It wasn't a small trim. It was a deliberate, large-scale divestment, and people noticed. Kimball had always been seen as one of Elon's last personal and professional loyalists. If he was jumping ship, what did that say about the iceberg ahead? This wave of institutional abandonment wasn't random. Analysts understood the message. Canada may have been the first to strike, but they would not be the last. Other countries, equally fed up with Musk's political affiliations, labor controversies, and incendiary public behavior, now had a blueprint. It was no longer far-fetched to imagine that Tesla and Starlink could be hit with similar retaliatory measures in Europe, Australia, or even parts of Asia. Musk's actions, once chalked up to eccentricity or genius, had started to look like liabilities. And in an industry built on long-term contracts, regulatory trust, and public goodwill, being perceived as unpredictable was the fastest path to market rejection, and weapons get targeted. As the sell-offs began, Tesla's stock price tumbled fast. Starlink's valuation took a hit too, especially as rumors swirled that more governments were weighing similar moves to Canada. What had once seemed like a sure bet was now a liability. Hedge funds and mutual funds that had treated Musk like a golden goose now viewed him as radioactive. The message to retail investors was deafening. If the financial giants were bailing, you'd better not stick around. Tens of billions in market value were wiped off the board in a matter of weeks. And while the headlines focused on stock prices and share dumps,
Now, Tesla's stock has tumbled 8%, pushing its market value below $1 trillion.
a quieter, more dangerous threat was emerging behind the scenes. What no one was paying attention to, yet, was Starlink's financial health. With government contracts being shredded and more public skepticism brewing, revenue streams that once looked like long-term lifelines were now drying up. Starlink had bet big on international deals and political goodwill. But in this new landscape of economic revenge and global power plays, those bets were beginning to implode. Countries that once praised Starlink for connectivity miracles were now hesitant to deal with a company so closely tied to a volatile billionaire. Entire satellite launch schedules were being pushed back or cancelled. Revenues plummeted, staff morale dipped, and insiders began whispering that the end might be humiliating. So how do you go from building rockets to watching your own empire burn? It starts with one move no one saw coming, and it ends with a billionaire surrounded by smoke, searching for a way out. Inside government offices across Europe, Asia, and Australia, there was a sudden shift. Officials who had once treated Starlink like a technological messiah were now revisiting contracts with furrowed brows and cautious silence. In public, everything appeared steady, but behind closed doors, the recalculations had already begun. Starlink had spent years positioning itself as the backbone of future global internet access.
Starlink is SpaceX's answer to providing global, high-speed internet coverage using a network of thousands of satellites.
It promised to connect the world, especially the disconnected, with high-speed, reliable satellite coverage. The vision was bold, the technology impressive, and governments were all in, until Canada pulled the plug. After that, the entire tone shifted. Suddenly, Musk's name became baggage. Germany froze its discussions on nationwide Starlink integration. France quietly shelved plans for rural infrastructure projects. The UK, which had been exploring Starlink-backed initiatives in underserved areas, began redirecting attention toward local alternatives. The financial impact hit fast and hard. Starlink's projected revenue for the upcoming fiscal year took a nosedive, plunging by over 40% in revised estimates. For a company that had banked on aggressive global expansion, this was a brutal correction. What had once been seen as untouchable momentum was now fragile and bleeding. Investors who had championed the project were now recalculating their expectations. Internal reports painted a grim picture. Not only were new contracts drying up, but existing ones were being quietly dismantled, sometimes without public announcement. Countries didn't want the fallout of being directly associated with a Musk-led operation, especially one under fire on so many fronts. Even within Starlink, the mood had shifted. Executives who had once touted multi-continent launches and universal adoption were now spending more time in damage control meetings than strategy sessions. Some employees joked that every morning brought a new diplomatic email asking for clarification on Musk's latest online comment, as if a tweet could unmake an entire infrastructure deal, which it could. So while everyone was watching Tesla's price ticker melt on live TV, Starlink was bleeding out in the dark, under the radar, with almost no one noticing, until it was far too late to stop. Tesla's cash burn turns into a death spiral. If Starlink was quietly bleeding, Tesla was openly hemorrhaging. While the headlines were busy tracking political drama and fluctuating stock prices, the deeper issue was far more dangerous. Tesla was burning through cash at a speed that couldn't be sustained. The logic behind the strategy seemed simple enough. Faced with a sharp decline in global demand, Tesla slashed vehicle prices across key markets like North America, Europe, and Asia. For a brief moment, it worked. Sales figures saw a bump, enough to create the illusion that things were under control. But that illusion shattered quickly. The aggressive price cuts came at a brutal cost. Tesla's profit margins, once considered a benchmark in the auto industry, vanished practically overnight. As if that wasn't bad enough, external conditions kept stacking up against the company. Tesla showrooms began looking more like storage facilities as unsold inventory piled up. Manufacturing slowed. Suppliers started asking uncomfortable questions. The demand Tesla had relied on to power its growth was evaporating right in front of them. At the same time, operating costs were moving in the opposite direction. Legal challenges surrounding Tesla's self-driving technology turned into full-blown court battles. Expansion projects in Texas and Germany were devouring more cash than anticipated.
Only 3% of Germans have said that they are considering to buy Elon Musk's Tesla.
Running behind schedule and over budget. And with Starlink's revenue streams drying up, Elon Musk no longer had the luxury of shifting funds between his companies to plug the holes. The situation escalated quickly. Each quarter, Tesla's earnings reports delivered worse news than the last. Cash reserves were shrinking at a speed that had analysts recalculating their forecasts mid-meeting. The strategy of cutting prices to spark sales had backfired, turning into a dangerous cycle. Lower prices meant razor-thin margins, which meant Tesla needed even more volume to break even. But with every quarter, demand weakened further, not strengthened. The cycle was spiraling out of control. By the time the fiscal year ended, Tesla's cash position had slipped below the safety threshold for a company of its scale. Behind the glossy marketing and Twitter updates, the company was running out of options. Financial institutions started murmuring about bankruptcy. Analysts, once bullish on Tesla's market dominance, began using words like unsustainable and implosion in their briefings. The same Wall Street crowd that had once cheered Musk's every move was now quietly pulling back, wary of the storm brewing ahead. What happened after this didn't just target Musk's companies. It came for the man himself, and it marked the beginning of something much bigger. A global revolt that no one, not even Musk, could outrun. After the US introduced tariffs on Canadian aluminum and auto parts, Ottawa didn't just protest, they retaliated. Their strategy? Simple and savage. Hit the most high-profile figure in American tech, a billionaire with a global footprint and businesses that relied heavily on free trade. The message was clear. Hurt us, and we'll hit back where it really stings. So when Tesla's prices in Canada suddenly doubled overnight due to the new tariffs, it was a shot fired in an escalating trade war.
Transport Canada is freezing rebate payments for Tesla until each claim is individually investigated.
Tesla, a brand once celebrated in Canada, was now being erased from showrooms and sales charts. The damage was immediate and deliberate. To twist the knife deeper, Canadian officials didn't shy away from calling Musk out by name. They accused him of damaging Canada's economy and aligning himself too closely with Donald Trump's nationalist policies. In short, Musk was the main event in Canada's retaliation playbook. But Canada's strike turned out to be just the beginning. Across the Atlantic, European leaders had been watching and waiting. The moment Canada made its move, the floodgates opened, and Europe didn't hold back. Tesla, once hailed across Europe as a symbol of innovation and clean tech glory, suddenly found itself painted as the villain. European governments, fed up with both Musk's political leanings and America's increasingly aggressive trade stance, began tearing down Tesla's presence piece by piece. Germany didn't bother with subtlety. Berlin quietly ended subsidies for electric vehicles, but only for Tesla. France went for the jugular. Officials there announced an investigation into Tesla's safety certifications, effectively halting new deliveries in several regions. Buyers were left waiting. Dealers had no answers. Tesla's pipeline in one of its strongest overseas markets had just been frozen solid. But it wasn't just policy shifts behind closed doors. On the streets, things escalated quickly. What started as scattered protests turned into open hostility. Protesters gathered outside Tesla's Berlin factory, waving signs and shouting slogans. Some groups staged blockades.
And what people are calling a day of action against Tesla CEO Elon Musk.
Others took things further. Reports emerged of vandalism at Tesla charging stations, and damage to delivery trucks. What Elon Musk built was never just about cars or satellites. It was about controlling the narrative of the future. But somewhere along the way, the narrative slipped out of his hands. Governments no longer saw Tesla or Starlink as untouchable marvels of technology. They saw them as pressure points, ways to strike back at an increasingly chaotic web of global politics. Canada lit the match, but Europe made sure the fire spread fast. And as Tesla's value dropped and Starlink's contracts disappeared, it became clear that Elon Musk was being dragged into a global tug-of-war, one that had little to do with technology and everything to do with power. It wasn't just angry tweets or cancelled orders anymore. In cities across France and Germany, the backlash against Tesla erupted into full-blown chaos.
Police here in Germany are blaming arson after a suspected attack on Tesla's European plant near Berlin.
One incident near Lyon escalated to shocking levels when masked activists stormed a Tesla dealership and set it ablaze.
Tonight, authorities investigating what they're calling a targeted attack on a Tesla repair center in Las Vegas,
leaving behind charred metal and millions of dollars in damage. The attack was the loudest possible message that Elon Musk's empire was no longer welcome. Tesla goes from trendy to target. In Berlin, Tesla's massive gigafactory turned into a protest magnet. What once symbolized innovation and clean energy had become, in the eyes of many, a symbol of American corporate overreach. The streets told their own story. Charging stations were defaced. Parked Cybertrucks were scratched, spray-painted, and left with insults scrawled across their windows. In Paris, a Model S was found with broken glass and bright red paint spelling out a message that could be heard across the continent. No billionaires in Europe's future. And yet, despite the growing aggression, European political leaders barely raised a brow. The silence was strategic. Musk was becoming a political liability, and letting public anger do the dirty work meant governments could apply pressure without ever stepping into the diplomatic arena. As protest intensity ramped up, Tesla's sales began to collapse across the region, and no one in power seemed too upset about it. Across the globe, another superpower had been watching closely, and when it made its move, it didn't involve protest signs or broken windows. China simply shut the door. For years, Tesla's crown jewel had been its foothold in China. The Shanghai Gigafactory had become the company's most productive plant, and Chinese consumers had embraced the brand with open arms. But that chapter closed fast, and without ceremony. It began with small shifts that seemed harmless at first. Government subsidies that once fueled Tesla's explosive growth were redirected to domestic companies like BYD, XPeng, and NIO. Then came new waves of red tape, regulatory changes that forced Tesla to jump through near-impossible compliance hoops. Data privacy concerns were raised, safety standards were reviewed, production slowed. But the final blow came when China's Ministry of Commerce announced that Tesla would no longer be eligible for government procurement contracts or any form of state-backed financing. In a market where scale is everything, this was the equivalent of cutting off oxygen. Tesla sales in China began a sharp descent, not because the cars stopped working or prices changed, but because the brand now carried political baggage. Buying a Tesla was no longer cool. It was controversial. With Canada's tariffs starting the fight, Europe turning hostile, and China shutting down operations, the dominoes didn't just fall, they avalanched. In a matter of weeks, the anti-Musk sentiment spread further. Asia and Australia didn't hesitate to follow. Australia, once a small but loyal market for Tesla, took swift action. State governments abruptly removed the company from electric vehicle rebate programs, with officials stating that Musk's public behavior made his business no longer eligible for state-level incentives. Even Tesla's charging network was stripped from several infrastructure projects. Within just 2 months, Tesla's sales in Australia plummeted by nearly 30%, the fastest drop since the company entered the country. South Korea made its move next. The government revoked Tesla's preferential tax treatment and launched antitrust investigations into the company's pricing strategies. Several provinces took the rare step of publicly condemning what they described as Musk's abuse of market power, urging citizens to support domestic electric vehicle makers instead. What started as economic policy turned into a national message. Musk isn't welcome here. Even Southeast Asian countries joined in. Singapore and Malaysia quietly began cancelling Starlink-related infrastructure deals, citing concerns over data sovereignty and political neutrality. Tesla's regional partnerships dried up almost overnight, and previously approved government incentives were quietly withdrawn. By now, the message was impossible to miss. What began as an isolated trade spat had snowballed into a full-on global boycott. The backlash was about global power, national pride, and a shift away from depending on one man's empire. Countries were repositioning themselves in a world where American tech no longer held an untouchable throne. By the time Musk and his executive team realized the scale of what was unfolding, the dominoes had already fallen. This wasn't a public relations crisis they could out-tweet. It was something bigger, a geopolitical and cultural rejection of Musk himself. One by one, countries that had once welcomed Tesla with subsidies and red carpets began shutting their doors and turning off the spotlight. Elon Musk wasn't always a political lightning rod. For years, he managed to straddle the fence, positioning himself as a forward-thinking technologist who kept a safe distance from ideological warfare. Tesla had built its empire on that image, attracting environmentally conscious, left-leaning consumers who saw the brand as a symbol of progress, not politics. And then Musk made the fatal move. He backed Donald Trump. The impact wasn't theoretical. It wasn't just tweets or think pieces. It was deeply personal. Across liberal strongholds like San Francisco, New York, and Seattle, customers began cancelling orders. Not because the vehicles were faulty or overpriced, but because the brand now felt toxic. Longtime owners started trading in their Teslas, no longer comfortable being associated with what they now viewed as hypocrisy. In Europe, the reaction was even sharper. Consumers in Germany, France, and the Netherlands, already on edge after Musk's environmental controversies, responded swiftly. Tesla was no longer seen as a climate savior, but as an American tech empire run by a man whose political leanings betrayed the very values the company had once promised to uphold. The betrayal ran deep. Tesla had marketed itself as the future, a clean, sustainable, tech-driven solution to a warming planet. Yet its founder was now embracing a political figure known for dismantling environmental protections and dismissing climate science. That contradiction wasn't just bad optics. It severed the emotional connection between the brand and its most loyal customers. And once that bond was broken, no amount of innovation could fix it. While Tesla's public image burned, a slower and potentially more dangerous crisis was brewing behind the scenes, one that Musk couldn't deflect with memes or distractions. For nearly a decade, he had promised that Tesla was on the brink of delivering true self-driving vehicles. There were grand declarations about robo-taxis, fully autonomous navigation, and a world where drivers could nap while their cars did the thinking. Tesla fans believed it. Investors believed it. Regulators were less convinced. As time passed and these promises failed to materialize, the scrutiny intensified. Investigations were launched, safety boards issued warnings, and eventually the claims stopped looking like overconfidence and started sounding like fraud. The empire starts to buckle. As these investigations unfolded, Tesla's internal morale plummeted. Employees found themselves caught between loyalty to a company they once believed in and the growing realization that they were working for a man who could bring the entire operation down with a single tweet. Investors grew restless. Legal teams expanded, and once adoring fans began looking elsewhere for innovation. With global markets collapsing, government partnerships vanishing, and a criminal case possibly looming, Tesla was no longer just a car company, it was a crisis in motion. And for the first time, it wasn't clear if Musk could talk, tweet, or litigate his way out of it. The vision of full autonomy was powerful, but it never stood up to reality. Tesla's so-called full self-driving system, sold with bold claims and premium pricing, turned out to be dangerously unreliable. Despite all the marketing buzz, the tech was incomplete, inconsistent, and, most importantly, unsafe. Crashes mounted. Footage of Teslas veering off roads or slamming into obstacles circulated online, each one dragging Musk's reputation further into the dirt. Federal regulators at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began circling, and with every new incident involving autopilot, the scrutiny intensified. Fatalities triggered investigations. Then came the lawsuits. Families who had lost loved ones in crashes involving Tesla's semi-autonomous features accused the company of pushing exaggerated claims and glossing over limitations, and the most damning accusations didn't come from critics or angry consumers, they came from inside. Internal emails and whistleblower reports painted a stark picture. Tesla engineers had reportedly raised concerns again and again, warning that the tech wasn't ready, but Musk wouldn't budge. He dismissed their caution, insisting that full autonomy was just one software update away. That relentless optimism, or denial, has now attracted more than just angry headlines. The Department of Justice is conducting a criminal investigation into whether Tesla engaged in consumer fraud by knowingly misleading buyers. Musk had tied Tesla's value and future to this one ambitious promise, but as legal troubles pile up and public trust evaporates, those promises are beginning to look like empty hype. The collapse didn't create silence. It created a vacuum. And in the ruthless world of electric vehicles and satellite tech, vacuums don't stay empty. They get filled. Fast. Tesla's downfall unleashed a corporate feeding frenzy. Legacy giants and ambitious startups, long relegated to second place, suddenly found themselves holding all the cards. BYD, Rivian, Lucid, GM, and Ford had watched Musk's antics from the sidelines. Now, with the Emperor exposed and the palace gates wide open, they charged in. They didn't just release alternatives, they released upgrades. Their EVs were cleaner, simpler, safer. They promised reliable customer service instead of cryptic tweets. Their vehicles weren't wrapped in controversy or buried under recalls. Consumers noticed. Demand shifted. Wait lists for Teslas shrank, while buyers lined up for electric trucks and sedans with badges that had never trended on Reddit for all the wrong reasons. The carnage didn't end with cars. In the satellite sector, Starlink's monopoly disintegrated almost overnight. For years, it had been the go-to option for rural and underserved areas across North America and Europe. But with Musk's reputation unraveling and trust evaporating, telecom giants from Europe and Canada swooped in. They launched regional satellite networks that promised neutrality, regulation, and consistency. Three things Starlink could no longer guarantee. The companies Musk once disrupted were now doing the disrupting. And they weren't just replacing him, they were making sure he couldn't climb back. The workers strike back. While boardrooms celebrated his downfall and new kings took the throne, another uprising was unfolding in the shadows, this time from the ground up. Musk's troubles didn't just unleash market chaos, they ignited something deeper. Workers who had long been silenced by non-disclosure agreements and fear began speaking up. For years, labor unions had stood at the edge of Tesla and Starlink's walls, shut out by aggressive policies, corporate pressure, and the looming shadow of Elon Musk's influence. But once that influence began to fracture, the moment they'd been waiting for finally arrived. The collapse gave workers a rare window of opportunity, and this time, they didn't flinch. From Tesla's former factories in Nevada and Texas to Starlink's scattered ground stations, the workers took action. They banded together, organized in numbers the companies hadn't seen before, and made sure they were heard. Strikes rippled through production lines. Lawsuits began piling up, not quietly in backrooms but in public courtrooms, with media attention that couldn't be shrugged off. And those legal battles paid off. New contracts were drawn up that redefined what labor rights could look like in the modern tech and manufacturing industries. In the US, lawmakers took notice. For the first time in decades, legislation passed to protect union efforts within the electric vehicle and satellite sectors. These weren't vague promises or symbolic bills. They were hard laws, crafted with worker protection as a priority. Across the Atlantic, Europe saw its own shift. Collective bargaining agreements pushed automakers and telecom firms to raise wages, offer better benefits, and promise job security to thousands who had been quietly exploited for years. But the impact didn't stop at Tesla and Starlink. The rebellion sparked a chain reaction. Tech workers across Silicon Valley and beyond, inspired by the downfall of Musk's empire, found the courage to stand up in their own workplaces. What had once felt impossible suddenly became urgent and achievable. They demanded protections, transparency, and the right to organize without fear of retaliation. The message rang loud across the industry. Never again would a visionary's ambition override the voices of those who built his dreams. While the workers reclaimed their power, another wave of quiet rebellion took shape, this time from customers. Tesla's collapse wasn't just a business story, it was cultural. For years, people had treated the company as more than a car manufacturer. It was a symbol of rebellion, innovation, and escape from fossil-fueled stagnation. Starlink had once promised internet freedom, unbound by government regulations or corporate monopolies. These brands had followers, not just buyers. But that loyalty cracked, not because of faulty batteries or delayed updates, but because of something deeper: betrayal. The image that customers had trusted began to rot. Musk's increasingly erratic public behavior, his political outbursts, and the endless stream of controversies poisoned the vision. The dream had turned into a cringe-inducing circus, and no one wanted to be part of the act anymore. Tesla owners who once boasted about their Model 3s now kept their keys in their pockets and avoided bringing up the brand. Some even removed the logo from their vehicles, quietly distancing themselves from the Musk brand. Starlink users ended subscriptions because the company no longer represented freedom. It symbolized chaos. Surveys confirmed the bleeding trust, especially among younger, environmentally conscious consumers, the very audience that had once made Tesla cool. Their verdict was clear. The company had lost its soul. And once trust is broken in the consumer world, there's no repairing it with flashy discounts or slick marketing. The exit was not a protest. It was an escape. As the smoke cleared, one uncomfortable truth remained. Tesla and Starlink weren't falling anymore. They had fallen. Their downfall was no longer theoretical. It was visible in the numbers, in the markets, in the headlines. Analysts issued reports with brutal honesty. Without loyal customers, without Musk's shrinking personal charm, and without the safety net of government subsidies, both companies were on life support. Tesla had once led the charge in electric vehicles. Now, it was being outrun by competitors who moved faster and cleaner. Starlink's troubles mirrored Tesla's. Its early monopoly over rural internet access had crumbled. European and Canadian telecoms filled the void with satellite networks that didn't come with late-night tweet storms or regulatory drama. They offered faster connections, safer infrastructure, and, most importantly, political neutrality. Musk had once mocked bureaucracy. Now, it was his biggest obstacle to staying relevant. Internally, both companies faced crumbling systems. Key engineers were long gone. Departments were gutted. Infrastructure that once hummed with futuristic energy now looked abandoned, patched together with duct tape and denial. The leadership was no longer feared or respected. It was disorganized and disconnected. So, what's next for one of the world's richest men? Can Musk pull off yet another reinvention? Or has the curtain finally closed on the era of the eccentric billionaire-turned-tech messiah? You tell us, what's your take? Let's talk in the comments.